It's the 22nd of January 1947. Klement Gottwald, chairman of the Czechoslovak Communist Party and state's prime minister, delivers a speech at the party's Central Committee meeting, emphasizing the need for a mass recruitment campaign. The communists had won the parliament elections a year earlier, but their victory was not overwhelming. Gottwald wants more. With other elections set for next year, he aims to secure the complete majority. He launches a recruitment drive targeting farmers, workers, small business owners, youth and women. The results will come soon. 3 months into the campaign, the Communist Party has 100,000 new members. In 6 months, that number reaches 500,000, and by the end of the year, nearly 1.5 million. When in February 1948, ministers from democratic parties submit their resignations to President Beneš, Gottwald, with his now massive party base, finds it easy to complete the coup. For more than 40 years, Czechoslovakia will be ruled by the communists. Klement Gottwald was born in Heroltis in Moravia as the illegitimate son of a poor laborer. His father never acknowledged him, but his mother cared about his future. She sent him to her sister in Vienna, where young Klement trained as a carpenter. However, he was far more drawn to journalism and shaping public opinion, just a step away from politics. And Gottwald was a quick learner, ambitious and radical in his views. He found his place in social democracy. When its left-wing faction radicalized in 1921, 24-year-old Gottwald supported the split. He became one of the founding and leading members of the newly formed Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, while also writing for party newspapers. His articles were filled with communist ideology, calling for uprisings against capitalists. In 1925, he became a member of the party's Central Committee, and 2 years later, now living in Prague, he joined its presidium. He also collaborated with comrades abroad, most notably with Stalin's Bolsheviks in the Soviet Union. Then came the year 1929 and the 5th Congress of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia. This was the moment when Gottwald fully revealed his ambitions and his ability. He surrounded himself with a group of equally radical men known as the Karlin Boys, named after the party's secretariat in Prague's Karlin district. This group of politicians, most of them already in their 30s, included figures like Jan Šverma, Pavel Reimann, Josef Gutman, Jaromír Dolanský, Václav Kopecký, and especially Rudolf Slansky, whose fate would later take a dramatic turn. At the Congress, Gottwald harshly criticized the party's existing leadership, accusing it of being completely disconnected from the struggles of the poorest, especially workers. He also outlined his vision for achieving the Communist Party's goals through radical confrontation, rejection of compromise, and elimination of critics. The Congress went exactly as he had planned, and just as Moscow had hoped. Klement Gottwald became General Secretary of the party, and his supporters took full control of its leadership. The results of the Congress cause an uproar. About half of the party's members leave. The new leadership is criticized by communist deputies and senators, as well as by intellectuals who are either members or supporters of the party. Among them are famous writers such as Ivan Olbracht, Stanislav Koska-Neumann, Marie Majerova, Jaroslav Seifert, or Vladislav Vančura. However, this does not sway the party from its new course. Gottwald deals with his critics swiftly and as promised, by expelling them from the party. The Bolshevization of the party is now complete, and the party becomes an extension of Moscow's influence. What can be expected from these new communists is made clear in Gottwald's very first speech after he becomes a deputy in 1929. We are the party of the Czechoslovak proletariat, and our highest revolutionary headquarters is truly Moscow. And do you know what we go to Moscow to learn? We go there to learn how to twist your necks. And you know that the Russian Bolsheviks are masters at it. In the 1934 presidential election, Gottwald ran against the incumbent Democratic President Masaryk under the slogan, "Not Masaryk, but Lenin." He failed. To escape prosecution for his campaign statements, he fled to the Soviet Union. There, he established further contacts and had the opportunity to closely observe Stalin's brutal purges, which peaked in the 1930s. Gottwald was both fascinated and terrified by Stalin. He admired his power, but also feared him. Even Stalin's closest allies, communists who had lost his trust or simply fallen out of favor, ended up in prisons or execution chambers. In December 1935, authorities dropped the charges, allowing Gottwald to return to Prague, but not for long. After the Communist Party was banned in 1938, he headed back to Moscow again. During World War II, Gottwald negotiated with the new and exiled President Beneš about the future of the country. He successfully pushed through the concept of the so-called National Front, a system that eliminated right-wing parties and merged all the others into a single coalition where communists held the dominant position. The leaders of the democratic London exile, including Beneš, were largely reduced to mere spectators. Klement Gottwald returned to Czechoslovakia after its liberation in May 1945. A year later, the communists won the elections, securing nearly 40% of the vote, and Gottwald became prime minister. Now, he felt strong enough to complete what had begun at the negotiating table in Moscow, the transition of the country to a communist dictatorship. February 1948 brought the coup that the communists would call the Victorious February. The events culminated on the 25th when President Beneš, under pressure from Gottwald and the mob in the streets, accepted the resignation of non-communist ministers and replaced them with communists.
Právě se vracím za radu od prezidenta republiky. Mohu vám sdělit, že pan prezident všechny mé návrhy přijal.
The final piece of Klement Gottwald's plan fell into place on June 14, 1948. On that day, following the resignation of Edvard Beneš, he became president of the Republic. All members of parliament voted for him. His dream was now complete. The communists held absolute power, controlling the parliament, the government, and now even the head of state. After his election, Gottwald attended a ceremonial mass at Prague's St. Vitus Cathedral. Together with his wife Marta, he even traveled to pay respects at the grave of former President Masaryk, the symbol of democracy. But all of this was merely an attempt to gain public trust, including that of his opponents. This charade, however, would not last long. The communists swiftly eliminated both real and perceived enemies. They sent wartime resistance fighters, RAF pilots, businessmen, and clergy to newly established labor camps. Around 100,000 people ended up with long-term or life sentences in forced labor camps. Show trials followed, the most infamous being that of politician Milada Horáková, resulting in death sentences. In the end, more than 200 judicial executions were carried out. Communist propaganda was running at full speed. A cult of personality was built around Gottwald, much like Stalin's in Russia. Newspapers portrayed him as a leader solely devoted to the nation's welfare. Over 400 towns granted him honorary citizenship, 150 named streets or squares after him, and the city of Zlín was completely renamed Gottwaldov. Behind the grand parades and handshakes, however, the atmosphere in Czechoslovakia grew increasingly tense, even for those once privileged. Under the guidance of Soviet advisors, political trials began targeting members of the party itself. In a climate where no one trusted anyone and everyone informed on each other, Gottwald's drinking problem worsened. He used alcohol to numb his fear that the purges might turn against him. In the end, Soviet advisors chose different victims, mostly Jewish communist leaders, including Rudolf Slansky, the party's second-in-command, and Gottwald's longtime ally from the days of the Karlín Boys. Slansky became a victim of the very regime he had helped establish. He experienced firsthand the kind of trial led by Soviet advisors, the same ones he had invited to the country alongside Gottwald. Communist prosecutor demanded the death penalty, and the court delivered exactly that verdict for Slansky and 10 other defendants.
Přiznávám, že jsem prováděl
nepřátelskou činnost.
The president did nothing to help his longtime friend, even refusing a plea for clemency. He was certain that if he intervened, he would end up in Slansky's place. By this time, Gottwald was completely dependent on alcohol. He feared any summons to the Soviet Union, preferring to send his associates in his place. He had become a powerless puppet in a game he could no longer influence. Increasingly withdrawn at Prague Castle, he avoided contact with others. His health had already deteriorated significantly. His final public appearance came after the death of Soviet leader Stalin. Ignoring his doctor's warnings, he traveled to Moscow for the funeral. Shortly after returning to Prague, he died of an aortic aneurysm and liver cirrhosis. He outlived his idol and his greatest fear by just 9 days.